To discuss the role of AI in global sustainability, I'm joined today by Erin Halka. She is Senior Director of Solution Strategy with Blue Yonder. Hi, Erin.
Hi, Bob.
Good to see you, and thank you for spending time to me to
Oh.
talk about this essential issue. Is it the case, though, that supply chains today can help achieve global sustainability?
Absolutely. If you think about kind of the two sides of the supply chain, it's all about the planning element. How do we ensure that we have the products that we need to really satisfy the consumer on the end state? But also, as we have those products, how are we moving them? So it's
Right.
really our responsibility to ensure that as we are ordering products, finding inventory, that we're getting just the right levels. We're not having too much waste, too much bloat. We're also finding very sustainable sources to help with those products as we're pulling those into the consumer base. But as we're starting to move those, it's even more critical to find very sustainable flow patterns, very sustainable methods of moving those goods from autonomous trucking. We're responsible for helping retailers with that decision making. And then as we're moving those goods directly into the hands, we don't want to move them around too many times. So it's really
Right.
the goal is how do we just handle them as lightly as possible as they are on their journey to that consumer.
But with that in mind, you have to be able to measure the carbon emissions and the impact of each stage of the supply chain. Is that information available to companies today that they can make those determinations?
Absolutely, it is. It's available for them from a transportation perspective. They're being able to have, the trucks themselves need to be able to have those kind of metrics. So if they're adding up how much miles that they're driving, then they're looking to say, this is how much mileage we had on the roads due to our movement of goods in the past. And then as you start to look at more of an efficient method, this is the mileage that we are actually able to say, and then quantifying that mileage, that's how you can determine that carbon emission savings as well.
Okay, so whenever we talk about this idea of all this information and data, the magic word, or might I say the magic two words that pop up are artificial intelligence. How is AI playing a role today in achieving supply chain sustainability?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the past, it was really requiring some human brain to be able to come up with the most efficient way to do things. How much inventory do I need to order? Looking at a map and saying these are the most ideal routes. If you think about what artificial intelligence, it's trying to really augment that human brain and think about ways to be able to find things more efficient, more faster decisions.
Right.
So it's allowing folks not just to be more efficient in the way they're doing it, but also be smarter at a very granular level that people were never able to think of before. If you think about just an example of the trucking, again, in the past, maybe you would go through the same route all the time. Well, what happens if there's road construction? What happens, those take longer for emissions to sit out there. Artificial intelligence has more data at its hands in real time. So it also allows that autonomous decision to be made and fed over into the route, the path, the source, the flow, and being able to help circumvent those changes, those slowdowns, et cetera.
You alluded to the situation where trucking might face a problem. I wonder if you could give me a few more real world examples of how AI is actually helping companies to reduce their carbon footprint.
Yeah, that's a great question. So you think about the trucking component, that is part of the driving, but think about once that truck actually physically gets to the warehouse. Today there's a lot of trucks that line up waiting to get into the bays. If you can actually find trucks in a more efficient lineup for how fast they can be unloaded from that yard management, that is one of the key ways. We're seeing cameras out sitting in yards, and that helps give a flow path even within the yard itself on how you can prioritize which vehicles should be unloaded, getting them to the right bay at times so they're not backing up, moving around, and actually flowing them through to get those goods off those trucks
How
as faster as
interesting.
possible.
So in other words, the AI is detecting the individual nature of each truck in the yard, what it's carrying, how much it's carrying, the time it takes to unload, and then making determinations of the order of unloading and loading based on that.
Exactly.
Wow.
And putting it in the right place, and then also even thinking about, as you've got those trucks there, how can we also load them back up as efficiently as possible? So customers are also looking at ways, instead of putting those goods away and then moving those goods back out, how can you efficiently be able to just unload those goods, pick exactly what you need, load them back up, so then they can go on to the stores, they can go on to the micro-fulfillment centers, they could be moved into a very optimal fast path as well.
But Erin, are you talking about the state of affairs right now, or is this more aspirational? Is this really happening?
This is really happening today. If you look at how many warehouses that you have, you also really need to have a prioritization. And so we're able to do that with our decision making with the trucking using the artificial cameras that we talked about. But we also have ways that we're not just even thinking about trucking. We're also seeing a lot of companies that are thinking about this from an inventory perspective. So sustainability is not just about manufacturing goods anymore. It's about how do we recycle the goods that we have to be able to pull those back into the supply chain. So if you think about the re-commerce. So a lot of stores now are offering up for consumers to be able to recycle those goods, bring them in and buy new goods or exchange them, or being able to even resell them back on a platform. REI is a great example of that. So now that they're having to forecast the inventory they need, they only have to buy as much or a smaller amount because 30% of their sales hopefully are going to be coming from resale items. So if you think about what you're able to actually reuse and continue cycling through the supply chain, that's huge. So not only do they have the need for those from the product perspective, but it's really critical because then they can also think about how do I have those moving through my warehouse facilities? How do I repair those goods? How do I make sure if I'm recycling those materials and actually creating new ones, I pull those back over into my suppliers? So it's a whole network of decisions that AI can help create to ensure that you're not overbuying, overproducing, because the last thing that consumers want to see is hearing about dumpster waste for goods.
Right, so AI is determining the disposition of returns, saying this goes here, this goes back into the flow, this is repaired, this is thrown out, this goes to discounters. That's an AI task now.
It is. It's starting to be. There's actually cameras now that can sit within a warehouse and actually scan the goods to be able to automatically tell them. In the past, it really required human interaction to look at a physical item and decide which section it could go in. Now you take that kind of human bias out of it and you're actually leveraging cameras and technology to be able to scan those items, decide where it could go, if it could actually be resold, repaired, or goes back into more of a reused, recycled.
But I did hear you use one word when you described AI and its role early in our conversation. Use the word augment. Augment humans, not replace them. Is that
Correct.
the case? So the humans are still somewhere in the picture in terms of making these ultimate decisions.
I think you're going to see some things that are doing both. If you look at robotics within a warehouse, those are sometimes replacing humans or augmenting them. There's also some decisions, though, where AI is coming in and it's helping provide humans with the right answer, and then there's still that human that kind of commits it, they approve it. There's a final kind of task maker to complete that process. So you're going to see a little bit of both when it comes to AI, and it just depends on which phase of the journey that you're on to do that. And also as people start to get more comfortable with AI, how much autonomous approval are they going to let continue to happen? And we're seeing more and more retailers that are getting more comfortable with the output of those decisions and being able to let the AI just actually go ahead and make that final decision for them.
And again, to bring this conversation full circle, it all comes down to the results being better sustainability in the supply chain.
True.
How interesting.
Yeah, if you think about just even some key metric like safety stock, letting a system actually go out and predict what the optimal safety stock should be versus in the past that required a human to decide what that value should be. So if you actually have a system that's guiding that, think about the inventory savings, the waste about producing those goods, the movement of those goods, all those costs go into sustainability, and now we're letting AI help with improving those decisions.
A critical tool at a critical time for absolutely important subject. Thanks for that, Erin. I do want to take a moment though to ask you just specifically about Blue Yonder today. What role are you guys playing in the supply chain right now?
We have really 3 phases again of this supply chain that we focus on. We focus on the consumer direct engagement. So just even if you think about the key growth of e-commerce, one of the big things that we're able to do from sustainability is to be able to help optimize the movement of those goods into the hands of the consumer. So how do we find the most efficient path? How do we reduce split shipments? Removing that cardboard waste, the packaging, the transportation, being able to help provide an optimal pulling of those goods into the consumer's base. So that's a key element that we can bring to the table. We're also able to have very efficient flow paths. So if you look at transportation now, Think about how many ports people are using. In the past, you really had North America specifically, maybe you used more ports on the West Coast. Now we're actually finding smarter flow paths that allow retailers to think about how do I get those goods across different ports like Houston, Savannah, New York, and being able to move those in. Well, now you have so many new truck routes. So you really need tools like our supply chain transportation capabilities to be able to help move those goods in a very efficient, fast way to get them where they belong, into the DCs, into the fulfillment centers, into the stores on a very critical path. And then if you think about our supply chain planning capabilities, everyone is trying to find the right balance of inventory. How do you make sure that you've got inventory in your consumers' hands when they want it, but you don't have extra waste, extra bloat that requires you to have extra warehouse facilities, extra transportation costs. So that is one of the key elements that we're also pulling in through our supply chain planning capabilities to help with sustainability too.
Thanks so much, Erin, for talking to us about this critical issue of global sustainability, the role of AI in that, and a little bit about Blue Yonder itself. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate this time.
I've been speaking with Erin Halka of Blue Yonder. Thank you very much for watching.